Okay, recording. Hey everybody, it's Kid the Nutritionist here, and today's video is going to be on calcium, but I'm taking it a bit further. Every time I watch a video on, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, right? It's always, oh my god, here's calcium and the benefits of how it helps you with stronger bones, stronger teeth. I kind of want to go beyond that because calcium actually does a lot of things in the body besides just, strong bones and strong teeth. So because of that, I want to dive into at least more or less 15, 20 things it does, because it's a really important signaling molecule, right? So what does that mean? That means if you're lacking sufficient amounts of calcium, you might have issues with hormones, you might have issues with enzymes, neurotransmitters for mental health. You might have issues in which your body isn't stimulating enough calcium. And also, we'll get into how much calcium you may need, certain things affecting whether you need more or less of it. It depends, right? I can't give like a specific amount that people need, right? It's about knowing yourself to get the right amount of calcium. It's a bit of a big one, but I'm keeping it very simple because this could have been way more complicated. The research is pretty cool on calcium beyond, bones and teeth, right? So yeah, let me begin. So when people hear the word calcium, immediately they think about the benefits of strengthening bones and teeth, as I talked about. But the thing is, 99% of the body's calcium is stored in the skeleton. Now, the remaining 1% is just as important as its function. The body, if necessary, will keep blood calcium levels stable because cells need, you know, calcium for survival to function. Just a tiny bit of that calcium is circulating inside your cells, regulating muscle contractions, nerve communications, hormone release, blood clotting, immune function, energy production, gene expression, and whether cells live or die, apoptosis, especially in regards to cancer for P53 tumor suppressor. And yeah, we're going to go beyond all this stuff and explain it. Okay, so the main thing I want people to understand about calcium is it's a big signaling molecule to make things happen, right? So it's like a second messenger, and whenever a hormone or neurotransmitter binds to a receptor, calcium is it's released from the endoplasmic reticulum into the cytoplasm. This little pulse tells cells of what to do. So, for instance, sodium helps you with going from point A to point B. Once you're from point A to point B, calcium then happens to tell what happens from B to C. If that makes any sense. Examples include releasing insulin, contracting a muscle, produce energy, activating immune cells, releasing neurotransmitters, turning genes on or off, beginning cell division. Without this calcium, right, which is pretty amazing, your cells cannot communicate properly. The central point of this article is that calcium is a signaler slash messenger all over the body, from hormones to neurotransmitters, enzymes, muscle movement, immune system activation, and everything else in between. Calcium, you'll always find it there in some capacity. So the main one, because, people like exercising and muscles and working out, right? So muscle contraction, important. Every skeletal muscle movement depends on calcium. The motor neurons cause acetylcholine release, and when this happens, the muscle membrane depolarizes, so calcium is released from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Calcium binds troponin, moving tropomyosin, so myosin binds actin, which causes your muscles to contract, right? You don't think about it too much, but your body does a lot of intricate processes just to move a finger or walk. So every time you move a finger, every time you flex, every time you walk, squat, whatever you do, right? That process is always happening. So it's interesting how we take it for granted that your body's so complicated, and yet, without even thinking, you walk, you jump, you do whatever you want, you sing. It's pretty awesome, right? God makes a very amazing body. In this way, calcium is just as important as other electrolytes. Without calcium, people may notice weaknesses when they're working out or they don't feel the pump. Cramps may develop when someone pushes themselves too far. Tremors may be caused in some cases. So you have the nerve, you get the end of it, the axon, you get the vesicles, acetylcholine receptor right here, you get the synaptic cleft, you have the sarcoplasmic reticulum, muscles, ER, you get the release of calcium that goes through, binds to troponin, you get the cross bridge formation between actin and myosin, then acetylcholinesterase, which is an enzyme to remove acetylcholine from the synaptic cleft. Calcium is then transported back into the SR. Tropomyosin binds active sites on actin, causing the cross bridge to detach. So it's like an on and off bridge. essentially. On to contract, you want to decontract, you gotta let go of it. Here's a gradient. Without getting too complicated, essentially electrolytes are very important for that function. The human is a biochemical electric body. So you use calcium, to kind of contract. And in between that, you have potassium working intracellularly to get things in and out. And then to oppose that, the calcium, right, magnesium helps with that to balance it. So if you want to relax, it helps you. That's why people, when they are very low actually in magnesium, notice when they get a magnesium lotion, they rub it on their body, they feel better, they feel that tension release. And in some cases, people that consume too much calcium or they lack getting vitamin K2, they can kind of feel that thing happening. And as a kid, I had a lock neck because I drank a lot of soda, which was not good. And I never got magnesium, so sometimes people could have a lock, right, or a very bad cramp in that case. So heart function. So the heart has a unique dependence on calcium. Unlike skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle requires calcium entering from outside the cell. Calcium controls heart contraction, strength, heart rhythm, what they call the pacemaker through the electrical conduction, and cardiac output through. So remember, the heart is a muscle too, which requires proper mineral balance of electrolytes to work at its best, such as sodium, potassium, magnesium, chloride, and calcium. So that's why when people have a heart attack and they want to kind of relax the heart, um, I don't know the amount, but I know doctors in the emergency room situation, they can inject a lot of magnesium to help the muscle relax. And it's kind of disappointing when I read the literature, because the literature is always focused on how too much calcium is bad, and I totally agree. Too much calcium is very bad. You don't want that happening. You don't want hypercalcemia. You don't want coronary artery score going up, and you get a blockage in your coronaries. So what I'm saying here, right, is I'll link it to another article which I wrote earlier about the importance of vitamin K2 and how it helps balance calcium to put it where it belongs, back in your bones, back in your teeth. So it does its job normally as a cell signaler, amongst other things. So every heartbeat begins in the sinoatrial node, the heart's natural pacemaker. They say node generates an electrical impulse that spreads across the atria, traveling through the AV node through the Purkinje fibers into the ventricular muscle. Now, the electrical signal itself cannot contract muscle. Instead, electrical impulses open L-type voltage-gated channels, Cav 1.2, located in the membrane of the cardiac muscles. What about balance? So here you have what's called SERCA2A. This is sarcoplasmic reticulum calcium ATPase. It's an enzyme responsible for approximately 70% of systolic calcium is pumped back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. This ATP-dependent pump prepares the SR for the next heartbeat. So one thing I want to make clear, right, is it's not like you have too much all at once or you have too little all at once. These things are happening very quick, in the fraction of a second and so on, where you have sodium ions, calcium ions, magnesium ions, chloride ions, the way it all works together, right, with the electrolytes. So sodium calcium exchanger, NCX, around a quarter to 30% of calcium is taken from the cell. Through the sodium calcium exchanger, it moves one calcium ion out of the cell in exchange for 3 sodium ions entering, using the sodium gradient established by the sodium potassium ATPase. Now, what about too little intracellular calcium? So when you have low calcium, you can have weaker cardiac contractions, negative inotropy, reduced stroke volume, you can have fatigue, exercise intolerance, where there's just some days, right, where you go to the gym and you work out and you're not feeling it. You're not tired exactly. You got energy. You could, rep and do stuff, right? But you don't feel like you're in the zone, right? I don't know how to explain this properly. But essentially, the best way I like to explain it to people, right, is, when you work out, right, and usually this is from people that do chocolate milk or they take a pre-workout with calcium in it, right? But essentially, people like doing that because when they flex their muscle and they contract it real tight, right, when you're lifting a weight, you feel the pump. You feel that like you're squishing that force and you're feeling it in your muscle. So for that reason, right, that's why when people are working out, they're not really feeling the pump, they're not really feeling it, and they feel a bit off. Because calcium's important to the extent where you got to contract your muscle. Hypotension in severe cases. So, interestingly enough, I've seen a few clients where they have low blood pressure, right? Usually high blood pressure is all the rage. And, I'm glad I get people with variety of problems because it makes me figure things out and become a bit smarter and to do more research, right? That's just the way it is, right? I don't just give up, crawl into a ball and cry. I do what I can to help people and I do the research. So for some people, right, if they have issues with low blood pressure, it's always related back to, drinking enough water and electrolytes. And the one missing electrolyte for these people in particular, they get like bradycardia. It could be, a lack of calcium. And some people just have a low calcium diet. And, people think it's good because, you won't get this calcification later on in life, or, you don't want to get the coronary artery. So erroneously, people write off that you need less calcium. But I think the average loss of calcium is between 200 milligrams to maybe 600 milligrams. Again, depending. We'll talk about that later. But point being, right, is you don't want to have no calcium in your diet. That's why it's important to have a little bit of dairy, a little bit of cheese, a little bit of kefir, right? A little bit of something to your body, a little bit of figs. That way you can replenish what you're losing every day. That's the whole point of vitamins and minerals, right? Your body uses so much, it gets rid of it, it's done with it, and it's gotta get more. It's all about balance and replenishment. So excessive intracellular calcium, after polarizations that are delayed, may trigger arrhythmias, hyperactivation of calcium-dependent proteases such as calpains, mitochondrial calcium overload, which can cause apoptosis, which you don't want, because you're trying to make more energy, opening of the mitochondrial permeability transition pore, increased reactive oxygen species production, ATP depletion, cardiomyocyte apoptosis and necrosis, you don't want damage there, of course, and adverse cardiac remodeling over time. So here you have the polarization, we got the L-type voltage-gated channels. Again, it's important, right? This is why some medications, they'll block it, but that's a different story. But point being, it's got to go through these channels so then it can then do its job. It goes through here, get the reticulum right here, then, it's released, the calcium ion, and then muscle contraction. So, yeah, everything works so beautifully in the body, it's amazing. When you give it what it needs, right? Because everything requires balance. Which is why I never recommend people to take a calcium pill. I recommend from the food. That's like one of the easiest way to get, calcium. And to balance it with a vitamin K2, usually a supplement because unfortunately there's a lack of K2 sufficiently found in foods unless you eat fermented foods. And fermented foods are tasty, I like them. Some people need to get a hang of it, but at the same time when you're getting fermented foods right, you're getting your little gut buddies, right? You're getting your probiotics, so to me it's a win-win. Blood pressure regulation. So calcium influences vascular smooth muscles. Proper intracellular calcium allows arteries to constrict and relax appropriately. Calcium also interacts with nitric oxide, potassium channels, magnesium, and the renin-angiotensin system. Adequate calcium intake has been associated in some studies with modest reductions in blood pressure, though effects can vary on diet and just, overall, how much you get, right? It varies for people depending on certain things. Like the K2, like your sodium, your potassium, your magnesium. Calcium activates calmodulin because skeletal muscle, unlike smooth muscles, contain no troponin. Instead, calcium binds to calmodulin, and it is a major calcium sensor inside vascular smooth muscle. Once calcium binds calmodulin, it creates a calcium-calmodulin complex. This activates myosin light chain kinase, MLCK, and it produces vasoconstriction when this phosphorylates the myosin light chain. This allows myosin to actin binding for cross-bridge cycling allowing smooth muscle contractions to occur. The artery narrows, the lumen becomes smaller, peripheral vascular resistance increases, and blood pressure rises. This is one of the primary mechanisms that determines systemic vascular resistance. Calcium influences the renin-angiotensin aldosterone system. Calcium also affects blood pressure indirectly by interacting with hormones that regulate blood volume and vascular tone. It's a long one. So one usual feature is that calcium inhibits renin secretion from the juxtaglomerular cells of the kidney, sometimes called the calcium paradox of renin release, because unlike many secretory cells where calcium stimulates secretion, elevated intracellular calcium suppresses renin production. So what does it mean? When you have lower renin, you have less angiotensin II. These effects tend to lower blood pressure by reducing aldosterone secretion, less sodium retention, less water retention, and reduced vasoconstriction. If calcium's way too dominant, it relies on having enough magnesium to block the L-type calcium channels and membrane electrical activity for homeostasis. People who have muscles that lock up easily, cramps, so on, may be low magnesium even if they get enough sodium. People are often worried about too much calcium when it comes to heart health. They are right to be worried, as some people with a high coronary artery calcium score, which indicates they may have a high accumulation of calcium causing a clogged artery. So, in essence, to make a long story short, right, it works with your kidneys. You have certain hormones that are released to balance your fluids. Your blood pressure, whether it's high or low, that's influenced. How much water in your body, if you have too much, edema, it determines that too. So, it works for a lot of things, actually, calcium. So here we have calcitonin and parathormone. What's a parathormone? That sounds funny. I got a wrong graphic for this one. But point being is you have a reaction in your body, right? You got feedback loops, depending on it being high, being low, influence through angiotensin 1 and 2, because you have 1 for activation, and 1 to signal it. You have calcitonin, and how it determines where your calcium goes. And then depending, I don't know if I talk about this much later on, but when your body, let's say for example, you have no calcium, right, that you're getting in your diet. So for example, your body doesn't have a sort of variety of reactions. It needs calcium to do all these things. These are very important, right? These signaling messenger molecules are important, right? Calcium. So what happens is it'll take some calcium from your bone. That's what it is, right? That's the beauty of having a skeleton. It can act like as a reservoir for a banking amount of calcium for later if you need it, depending on certain situations, right? Like you're stuck on a deserted island or you're lost in a forest or something, right? At least your body can tap into your bones and use it, right? Which is kind of neat, and it's kind of smart. But the point I want to make, right, is when that happens, your body has something called osteoclast. Osteoclast, it essentially chews up your bone, it breaks down a little bit of that bone, and it uses it for whatever it needs, right? All these functions. When you have a surplus of calcium, your body has what's called osteoblast. It then takes that extra calcium you get from your diet and it puts it back into your bones and it builds it. So just to keep that in mind, right? Because again, this all works all together and it's kind of cool. Neurotransmitter release impacting mental health. So every thought depends on calcium. When you really think about it, it's kind of interesting. When electrical impulse reaches the end of a neuron, the voltage-gated calcium channels open. Calcium enters, and then the synaptic vesicle fuses with the membrane. When this occurs, neurotransmitters are released. Some of these are dopamine, serotonin, GABA, glutamate, acetylcholine, norepinephrine, which are responsible for your mental health. Remember, you need plenty of animal-based proteins so your body gets the amino acids it needs to make your neurotransmitters, because they need protein, amino acids. And, one thing to add, right, just, there are some people that eat a lot of dairy and they're happy, cool. There's some people that don't eat any dairy at all and they're, don't think about it, right? Everyone's really unique in what they hate and don't like. I'm not a big cheese guy, but I try. Other people, they love cheese, right? That's just, I don't know, they love it. Whether it's the glutamate or the calcium, the body, when you get cravings, the body determines what you might need, right? So if you had no calcium, right, there would be no release of these neurotransmitters in theory, right? Luckily, your bones and teeth are the reservoir, and when you need it, you tap into it. When you don't need it, then you build it. So the only issue is when people go on a low calcium or low protein diet, people start to lose bone mass, leading to osteopenia or osteoporosis. So I want people to know, right, that if that happens, get more calcium. We'll talk about that later. And if you're going through that, you gotta work out. Like it's necessary. It's required. You gotta do the signaling from the mechanical stress of like lifting weights to the parts of the body that are under osteoporosis or that they're weaker or they're brittle or they have the porousness. You got to focus on working that out, right? And eventually over time, you get that stress and calcium goes and it rebuilds that area of your body that's very weak. Because people often think you take enough calcium, it solves that problem. People think you take enough calcium and vitamin K2, it solves the problem. Well, it helps prevent the calcification part, right? If you're well with it. But, you need to give your body the mechanical stress so it can cause the bone to be stronger, denser, harder, amazing, right? To be resilient. If a person suffers from mental health issues, it may be worth increasing their calcium intake to see if they're going to have any improvements, especially when it comes to depression and or apathy. So there's some people, right, they don't really react well to nothing, right? They're kind of like a stick in the mud. For those people, right, if you decide to eat a little more cheese or a little more milk or kefir or some source of calcium, right? You like figs, you have a few figs, and you notice an improvement in your mood, like, it's easier to laugh, right? It's easier to have emotions, right? Then it may be due to a person having a lack of calcium, right? It's just food for thought, right? Because for some people, we don't really associate calcium with mental health. I'm always focusing on protein because people, the low protein diet, right? Plant based, and that's gonna, respectfully fuck people up, right? And I don't like that. So calcium, right? That could be something that can help people in that regard. However, on the flip side, if people have a catechol-O-methyltransferase gene mutation, the COMT gene mutation, depending on what type of mutation you have, if you have too much things in your brain, right? Like you don't break down neurotransmitter in the brains fast enough, some people have an issue with that, then too much calcium could aggravate that. Maybe, I think, It's just a theory I have on that specific part. But, I haven't really tried that in practice because most of the people that come to me, they're more on the sad side, right, than, the overactive side. So, yeah, CLMT, let's see, excitatory. There we go, fix that correction. On top of that, exercise, again, I talked about that too, good enough calcium protein, yeah, stimulate it. So I don't want to go through all this, but essentially, this is what it looks like. Yeah, the dendrite here, you don't burn the nerve, get the action potential between the calcium, ATP, energy. Into plasma reticulum, you have the circa, which is the other one, depending, B snare also plays a role, depending. Then you have this transportation between, I suppose, one neuron to here. You have the NMDA receptor. This connects here. And then so on. Then you have the action potential continue going down. So that happens through all your nerves, right? They're much like Fast and Furious. They still take the car from like the tailpipe to like the engine. So that's kind of like your nerves, right? From like your brain to wherever, right? Let's say, I don't know. You see someone slip on a banana peel and you're laughing. Then all those sparks and goes to your brain, and then you laugh and you get that trigger, and you feel well. That's calcium's always there, right? They're electrolytes. Brain function signaling. So calcium helps to regulate learning, memory, long-term potentiation, synaptic plasticity, and neuron development. The hippocampus relies heavily on calcium signaling. Too little or too much intracellular calcium can impair neuronal function. When it comes to short-term and long-term memory, neurons fire repeatedly together, so glutamate is released, and then the AMPA receptor depolarizes the postsynaptic neuron. The magnesium block is removed, and the NMDA receptor it then opens, then large amounts of calcium enter the dendritic spine, strengthening the neuronal memory connection. So I'm thinking, right, perhaps, if a person's lacking calcium, can that affect their long-term memory, right? Of course, there's a lot of other things, right, that go into this equation, right? But I'm saying, right, is for some people, that they're low calcium, right, or they're lacking that, could adding more calcium have them fix their memory? I think so, yes. Because again, I'm seeing people that they have issues, and it can often be like the most littlest thing making the most profound impact. I just, overlook, right? Because like hair, right? Let's say, for example, hair, protein, skin, nails, right? But then like calcium also plays a role in it, like we can't just be neglectful towards these things, right? Everything plays a role, right? Even if it's like a little tiny 1% role, it's still profound in some ways, depending on what a person needs, right? So again, it's good to be very open-minded into that regard. This calcium influx acts as a signal that tells the neuron to strengthen its connection. The biggest takeaway I want people to know about calcium beyond strengthening bones and teeth is that calcium is essentially a signaler telling neurons what to do after electrical signal from sodium arrives. So like I said, right, sodium doesn't work alone, calcium doesn't work alone, they all are part of a big team. So sodium has all the connections happening, and then the calcium sort of releases the signals, right? Whether it's the enzymes, hormones and neurotransmitters. It's, you know, important. Hormone secretion signaling. So many endocrine glands require calcium. Calcium triggers secretory granules to fuse with the cell membrane. The general mechanism for hormonal or neural stimulus occurs when the cell membrane depolarizes or receptor activates. The voltage-gated calcium channels open or calcium is released from the endoplasmic reticulum. Intracellular calcium concentration rises. Calcium binds sensor proteins, primarily synaptogamins and calmodulin. Secretory vesicles move toward the plasma membrane. The snare proteins mediate vesicle fusion. Hormones are released into the bloodstream by exocytosis. Just put a period here. And without calcium, most peptide hormones remain trapped inside their storage vesicle. So, can calcium improve the function and release of hormones? To an extent, I do believe yes. I do think most people do not have a calcium problem, but some people can have a calcium problem. You know, it's just, like I said, right? Some people like eating cheese and dairy, and some people just don't, right? For whatever reason. So it's a matter of figuring out if a person has an issue with calcium or they don't, you know? So, for example, pancreas for insulin, right? Insulin moves glucose into cells for energy and excess into the liver and muscle glycogen as storage for use later. So it will signal the pancreas for insulin. Calcium. It helps signal parathyroid for parathyroid hormone. This regulates calcium and phosphate in the body. Can trigger bones to break down calcium through osteoclast. Vitamin D can increase the absorption of calcium. The kidneys can slow the amount of calcium lost. Again, you know, depending, right? This is why hormones are the way they are. Through signals. Pituitary gland for growth hormone regulates insulin growth like factor 1, IGF-1, muscle growth and maintenance, developmental growth of kids, and tissue repair. This is adrenocorticotropin stimulating hormone, right? From adrenal glands for releasing cortisol, regulates sleep-wake cycle, metabolism, blood pressure, catecholamines from the adrenal medulla, which are responsible for your fight or flight response to immediate perceived damage. When I say damage, danger. Like it's danger, like it damage you and you get all worked up. Which in a person that is stuck in fight or flight mode, it could be a lack of vitamin B1 thiamine, could be a lack of vitamin B5, could be a lack of magnesium, and again, they all work together to help you calm down. Thyroid C cells secrete calcitonin, inhibits osteoclast from breaking down bone when it does not need calcium. Kidneys eliminate more calcium from the body. So it's kind of cool how the body it figures things out when you give it what it needs. Blood clotting. Calcium is clotting factor 4. Without calcium, multiple clotting reactions may stop. It's responsible for stopping bleeds. Of course, calcium doesn't work alone. It requires a variety of nutrients such as vitamin K, zinc, vitamin C, amino acids, aka protein. Calcium is required for prothrombin activation, fibrin formation, platelet activation, and the coagulation cascade. This is why saturated blood collection tubes prevent clotting. They bind calcium. If you want to learn more about healing wounds quick and efficiently, especially if they're going through surgery, this article I wrote was pretty awesome. Some people really like it because, again, right, when you're in a hospital and you go through surgery, the food they give you is garbage. Like there's a variety of studies out there saying eat more protein after surgery. And the hospitals give you, like, bread and just bullshit and some veggies, and it's like, where's the protein? The human body is a flesh bag, like it or not. The flesh bag requires protein, amino acids, to be healthier, to repair, to heal, to grow. It's important, right? People like protein for some reason, and it's kind of sad. Immune system signaling. So immune cells constantly use calcium signaling T cells, which needs calcium to activate NFAT. Macrophages need calcium for phagocytosis, neutrophils need calcium for migration, B cells need calcium for antibody protection, and so on. Calcium signaling regulates cytokine production and immune cell communication, including lymphocytes, natural killer cells, mast cells, eosinophils, and basophils. So in a nutshell, when there's enough calcium and there's immune response, calcineurin is what activates T cells. Immunosuppression drugs are often used against autoimmune diseases. They work by blocking or/inhibiting calcineurin. In a way, a very low calcium diet may prevent your immune system from working at its full capacity. I don't know much about this. I'm gonna posit this as a potential theory, but it's possible, right? If you're having issues with autoimmunity, maybe a low calcium diet can work. But then again, your body is trying to do something about it, which is why you have calcium and activates your immune system to fight, right? It gets a signal. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. But I do know there's a lot of drugs being used against people with autoimmune disease to control it or to stop it. And I don't think in the long term it's helpful, right? Because it doesn't really solve the root cause. You're just kind of blocking something. Now, unless you're born with some kind of odd genetic defect, then no, it makes sense. But if not, I think the body is dealing with toxicity. You need vitamins, minerals, right? The proper for going through a liver phase 1, phase 2 detox. So your body can then bind and remove things that aren't good for you. And then you basically regain the capture of function for your body to work normally. Mitochondrial energy production. Small amounts of calcium entering the mitochondria activate several enzymes in the Krebs cycle for making energy. These enzymes are pyruvate dehydrogenase phosphatase, which activates pyruvate dehydrogenase, isocitrate dehydrogenase, and alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase. This increases production of NADH and FADH, supplying electrons to the electron transport chain, increasing ATP synthesis. It results in more ATP production, which is your body's energy currency. Now, in some cases, too much calcium may overload mitochondria and overload, causing contribution to oxidative stress and cell injury. So that's kind of the point of why people shouldn't take too much calcium. That's kind of why people should also take vitamin K2. That's why I'm questioning people that take vitamin D3 supplements because it could increase calcification by a lot. That's why I recommend vitamin D from the sun, because vitamin D is not just, this hormone, right? Kind of like cholecalciferol, right? It's red light, it's blue light, it's green light, it's the entire spectrum of the wavelengths that we can't see, visible, invisible, IR, the whole 9 yards, right? We have yet to even measure the glory of sunlight on the human body because we just think vitamin D, the end, right? And that's a very myopic way of thinking. So again, you need all this, right? Pyruvate dehydrogenase to help you with your Krebs cycle, your citric acid cycle, electron transport chain, however you want to say it. Digestive enzyme activation. Calcium supports digestive enzyme secretion, stomach signaling, pancreatic enzyme release, and gallbladder contraction. Again, it's a smooth muscle contraction. Calcium activates calmodulin, which regulates numerous enzymes throughout the body. Hundreds of enzymes require calcium directly or indirectly. Calcium signals triggers exocytosis of enzymes containing granules, releasing digestive enzymes such as trypsinogen, chymotrypsinogen, pancreatic lipase, amylase, and elastase. In a way, calcium can be a good tool to help people digest their food. If they notice they're having issues, they may be lower in calcium. They should incorporate a bit of cheese into their diet, maybe a bit of kefir, right? It'd be good to have a little bit of kefir with every meal, for your little gut buddies, probiotics. But the point isn't to eat a bag of cheese or too much calcium, right? No, that's not the point. The point is just to get a little bit of something in you, right? To help you with that. Hypercalcemia may impact the acinar cells to prematurely activate trypsinogen within the pancreas, contributing to acute pancreatitis. This is why magnesium becomes important by helping to regulate calcium channels, and vitamin K2 helps to put calcium where it belongs. In response to that, alcohol can be a big issue with that mechanistically. Certain medications can be a problem with that mechanistically. And there's a few other things mechanistically that can impact, your pancreas in that regard, but those are just the main ones. Gene expression. So calcium controls transcription factors like nuclear factor of activated T cells, NFAT. This is responsible for... So again, this is in a nutshell. These things do a lot of things. They do a shit ton of things. Like, it's crazy. Like look at any study or Wikipedia. I mean, like, it's pretty crazy, like, how much they do. So I can appreciate how simplified I'm being in this. So again, NFAT, right? DNA binding, immune cells, and neuronal growth. Then you have CREB, which is cyclic AMP response element binding protein, responsible for gene transcription, neuronal plasticity, long-term memory formation, and spatial memory. Should be a period here. Myocyte enhancer factor 2, MEF2. These are also transcription factors, cell differentiation, embryonic development, and stress response in some tissues. These regulate genes through muscle growth, brain plasticity, immune response, and cell adaptation. Now, cell division, they require calcium oscillation to progress through the cell cycle. Calcium regulates DNA synthesis, mitosis spindle formation, chromosome separation, cytokinesis, separates chromosomes. I put that twice. Overlook this. Transcription factors for proliferation, and it affects what type of specialized cell a stem cell should turn into, and can activate p53 tumor suppressor when damaged DNA is detected for apoptosis, so boom, you kill that cell before it becomes cancer. So I do think there's some research into calcium and helping it to cause, apoptosis, right? Again, amongst other things, right? You need zinc for your immune system, selenium, proteins, of course, it's pretty cool, that I'm kind of shining a light on calcium because, it's just always been the thing with calcium, right? Bones, teeth, the end. Fuck you. It's like, no, calcium's actually doing a lot, I'm giving calcium the bit of appreciation that it does need, right? Because someone out there might watch this video and this is going to be the thing that impacts you, right? That's why I do topics that are a bit odd or obscure, or I try and do them in a different way, right? Because there's so many videos on bones and teeth, right? It's boring. I get it. It's all AI regurgitation now. So here we go. Cell division. As we're going, right? Cell survival versus cell death. Calcium, to an extent, determines whether a cell lives or dies. Healthy calcium signaling affects cell repair, adaptation, and growth. Too much calcium may affect mitochondrial permeability transition pore opening, which causes cytochrome C release, apoptosis, and necrosis, which is cell death. So it's kind of cool how calcium can control whether you live or die, right? Well, certain cells, right? Make sure the healthy cells live, and they have a good life, and the weird bad cells, kill them before they become cancer and all weird. Fertility and sex hormones. Calcium is essential for reproduction. You want to have kids, you need some calcium, right? You want to have more testosterone, men, a little more calcium. Women, you too, you need calcium. Lactation, you need calcium. Calcium's important. We know it's important and you need it, but now you got at least 20 reasons why you need it, right? Yeah, it's just show appreciation, right? A little more informed. So for men, calcium participates in signaling pathways for Leydig cells, which synthesize testosterone in response to luteinizing hormone. Calcium helps regulate steroid proteins and enzymes, including transport of cholesterol into mitochondria, the rate-limiting step in steroid hormone synthesis. Calcium also supports Sertoli cell function, which is essential for nurturing developing sperm. So men, when you're breeding, calcium is required for sperm development and maturation. Takes around 60-ish days or so. You have motility of sperm's flagellum. Interesting. You need calcium, so it is like the hard, like a fish, right? Like how it waves its tail, right? You get the flagellum. So calcium really helps with the waving of the flagellum. And also fructose is used as its energy source, which I find interesting because it's like quick short burst, right, to get through there and swim. Capacitation for acrosome reaction. It penetrates through the zona pellucida, or pellucida. It's Latin, right? So it's probably zona pellucida. So eventually it penetrates in it. Once it penetrates and it's there, it then sends a signal. It starts to work. And then other sperms can give up because that's sperm 1. It penetrated first. And then women will keep going. So once that happens, sperm enters. Fertilization triggers calcium waves throughout the egg. The calcium oscillations activate embryonic implantation development. It regulates placental function from mother to fetus, supporting fetal development. Now again, this is in a nutshell. This is so much more complicated and it's interesting. But just so you know, right? If you're trying to conceive, again, fertility, right? Gotta get healthy. Calcium could play a very small role for that, right? To make sure the spermies, swimmies go well, right? Then you have skin health. Calcium regulates keratinocyte differentiation, skin barrier formation, wound healing, and epidermal renewal by producing proteins like keratin. Keratin's a structural protein. Filaggrin flattens the keratin fibers, so kind of like a blacksmith, right? They get the bar, right, of iron or whatever. They start smacking it and then they make a sword out of it, like badass. So you can kind of think of filaggrin like that. Then you have involucrin. They're the torf. It's a tough cornified envelope. You kind of think of it like a blacksmith making a katana, right? You know, like they're folding like the metal like 1,000 times or something, right? So it's stronger, denser. That's kind of what it does. They have loricrin. That's more or less what provides the moisture and the plumpness, and it helps. It's like a little barrier. And transglutamase is kind of like the end of it, right? It binds it all together. It's also used for meat glue, which is kind of funny. But yeah, the epidermis contains a calcium gradient that helps coordinate the maturation of skin cells. Mature keratinocytes are what keep skin barrier resilient by promoting tight junctions, desmosomes, and cornified envelopes. Regulate secretion of sweat from sebaceous and sweat glands. If someone has white spots on their nails, it's always going to be a zinc deficiency. But if you have enough zinc and you're doing well with zinc, it might be a calcium deficiency, right? Just try it onto that, right? Because there's some people with good zinc, right? And they still have the spots. But then it's also because, oh yeah, calcium also plays a role within that regard. So if you have spots in your nails, zinc doesn't cut it. You also need calcium. You take enough calcium, it's not cutting it, you need some zinc, right? So again, it's a good way to gauge more or less if you need something, right? Kind of cool. Hair growth. So hair follicles use calcium signaling to regulate stem cell activation, differentiation, growth cycles. Keratinocyte proliferation within the follicles depend on calcium-mediated signaling. Calcium signals, it helps to regulate transition hair follicles between the phases, right? Anagen, which is the first part, the growth. You get catagen, which is regression, it's the rest, right? Actually, wait. Yeah. Regression, I know it's proper, but regression sounds like a bad use of the word. I'm going to go with transition or growth. I'm going to do growth. Growth makes a little more sense, but yeah, I guess we'll do transition. It's a bit odd. Intelligent at rest, that's, your hair being the hair. And then exogen, it's where you shed and you lose your hair. Some melanocytes within the hair follicle use calcium signaling during melanin production, and melanosome transfer to neighboring keratinocytes. Calcium helps regulate melanocyte activity, melanosome transport, and cell communication, meaning calcium plays a role in signaling for hair color expression. This is why few people, especially those with low calcium, see some benefits of restoring hair color when they increase calcium and, they're having balding, patchy spots, that kind of thing. They could indeed benefit from calcium if they were low calcium in the first place, right? If not, it's usually going to be a protein problem or a zinc problem, something within that realm. Kidney function and calcium reabsorption. So kidneys tightly regulate calcium balance by reabsorbing calcium in the renal tubules, responding to parathyroid hormone, activating vitamin D into calcitriol, and calcium signaling within kidney cells also influences water electrolyte transport. Kidneys control the balance and reabsorption of calcium, and about 99 more or less calcium becomes reabsorbed. So based on these tubes, right, distal convolution, 37% reabsorbed, keeps on going. You get the proximal tubule. So about 65% of the calcium is going to be reabsorbed. I believe this is phosphate. It's going to be 80% reabsorbed. And then the thick ascending limb, 25% of that calcium is reabsorbed. So more or less you keep 99%, right? But again, we'll talk about little factors about that could impact that later. Bile secretion being stimulated. So hepatocytes and cholangiocytes use calcium signaling to regulate bile formation. Calcium controls bile acid transporters, chloride channels, and bicarbonate secretions, and water movement. Bile flow is important when it comes to your body trying to metabolize fats by emulsifying them with lipase enzymes. This way your intestines can digest the nutritional, mineral, and fat-soluble vitamin contents that come in even more efficiently. In essence, calcium can help people with detoxing by ensuring the conjugated toxins within the bile are ready to be mobilized out of the body, which is why I'm a big fan of binders, fibers, that kind of thing, so you don't reabsorb it through intrahepatic, was it intrahepatic recirculation, right? Or enterohepatic? No, it's enterohepatic recirculation. But again, it doesn't work alone, right? Again, it's signaling, right? So it'll be like a coach calling you to play, right? Like, get in there. That's calcium, right? And it's your job to go in there and do your job, right? Depending on basketball or football or soccer, which is a big thing with the FIFA thing. So without the coach, right, they can't make the calls and the plays, right? You can think of calcium that way. And then, zinc, come up, we need you. Or, phosphate, we need you, come up. D, K2, come on, man, we need you. And then you call in the hormones, right? You call in the neurotransmitters, right? Enzymes, all that kind of stuff, right? So it's actually, yeah, calcium's like a coach, right? So again, doesn't work alone, depends on other nutrients, such as vitamin D, increasing intestinal calcium absorption and supports calcium transport proteins, get sunlight. Matrix, GLA protein is very important. That's the whole point of vitamin K2, and also calcium being balanced. It helps direct calcium into bones and teeth while limiting inappropriate soft tissue mineralization. Very important. You want to have your CAC score be 0, which means you have no calcium being blocked. You don't want calcium in your eye, right? People have that issue where they can't see anymore. You don't want calcium in your gallbladder, right? Because that sucks, and I'm sure it's probably painful when you got to piss it out. You don't want your joints turning into more calcium, right? Because again, you're going to have that bone-on-bone action, well, calcium action. It could be formed in your collagen tissue, right? The sponginess, and that causes that pain for people in their joints, right? Which sucks. So again, that's the whole point of K2. K2 balances calcium from going crazy. Magnesium regulates calcium channels, supports parathyroid hormone secretion, and is required by vitamin D metabolism. It's also involved in at least 600 processes, so magnesium's also very important. Always need it. Can prevent excess calcium influx into cells. So if you're cramping real hard or you go too hard, magnesium can help you with that if sodium didn't do anything. Phosphorus combines with calcium to form hydroxyapatite, the mineral matrix that gives bones and teeth their strength. Protein provides a collagen framework upon which calcium-rich mineral crystals are deposited in bone. Boron appears to support calcium retention and influence vitamin D and steroid hormone metabolism. Too big in boron, I mean, you'll find some here and there in fruits, but some people like to do boron maxing and increase their testosterone, and then they feel like shit, and it wasn't even worth it. Or some people feel no benefits of boron. I don't think boron's that important, really. But it is with some fruits and veggies, so, no big deal, right? Silicone, or should be silica, right? Contributes to connective tissue and may play a role in bone matrix formation. Zinc, copper, magnesium supports enzymes involved in collagen synthesis, antioxidant defense like superoxide dismutase, and bone remodeling. Focusing on calcium alone without considering these nutrients may limit its effectiveness, and does not reflect how the body maintains mineral balance. So again, it's complicated. Everything, interacts with each other, right? It's one big family, and they all have to play nice with each other, right? Too much of one can impact the other in a bad way. Too little something can impact another one in a bad way, right? It's all about balance and getting enough of something, right? Nuance of daily calcium intake. So there are very minimal benefits, more or less, when it comes to calcium, above a gram or 1,000 milligrams. When you take more, you don't really do better. You don't really get stronger bones. You don't really have more of a benefit. It's just okay. Because again, it depends on vitamin K2, right? It depends on you getting vitamin D from the sun, right? To have that absorption of that calcium. Very important, right? All these things matter together. Having enough protein, right, from your bones, right, to have that remodeling happen, right? Especially with the phosphorus. So the research is for people that have osteoporosis, but more is not better, right? It never does in this regard. Again, if it's osteoporosis, eat well, get your proteins, get your calcium, and then do strength training. Strength training is required so your bones get stronger. If you don't do it, they're not going to get stronger. That's just the way it works, right? If you don't use it, you're guaranteed to lose it, right? And if you're working out your muscles, you're working on your bones, you're working on your bones, you're working on your muscles, so it's a win-win, right? Might as well, right? Kind of want to be like Dick Van Dyke. He's 100 years old, and he's still dancing and moving. It's pretty cool, right? But again, he never stopped moving, right? And now we're all in a chair, sitting and working 8 hours a day or whatever, right? So it's really important to get exercise like a hamster on a wheel. Except I want to get the hamster in a little barbell set and I don't know, machine so they can work out and get buff, Again, you don't get a buff, right? Whole point of working out is to have enough muscle, right? You can maintain yourself. The goal isn't to be a bodybuilder, right? Fuck that. The goal is to be very well rounded enough. So when you're 90s, 90, right? Or 90s, very important. Because people say, oh, there's a 90-year-old and they're like in a walker and they're all pathetic looking, and if you kick them, they'll probably fall down and die, right? That sucks. I don't want that to happen to you. I want you to be the 90-year-old that gets kicked down and they get back up again and there's no broken bone or pelvis, right? That's the goal, right? So considering the body is able to reabsorb 99% of calcium, more or less your body filters around 10,000 milligrams of it a day, or 10 grams. The body is using about 220 minimum to maximum 550, or actually even more, depending right on your activity, of calcium through poop, pee, sweat, again, your skin cells, all that kind of stuff, your hair, your nails. So I can't give you an accurate number of what exactly you're losing specifically, because that's just not realistic, right? The body varies every day. So again, test your calcium levels and make sure you're in the right balance, right, with your doctor. Because again, diet can impact how much you're not getting or getting, right? Activity, people that work out a lot more, they're going to use more calcium. Diuretics, right? Coffee can deplete you a bit of calcium, not too much though, but if you're like a chronic coffee drinker, that could impact you, right? Medications, some medications are also diuretics, so that's also that. I think other medications work on blocking calcium. So yeah, I mean, again, talk to your doctor, right, and inquire about your levels and if you're taking anything that's going to mess with you, right? So even if you ate zero calcium for the day, right, your body would more or less use up 200 to 550 milligrams of calcium from your bones. So I'd say somewhere between 550 milligrams to 900 milligrams of calcium would be the sweet spot for someone to determine their calcium intake to mitigate against loss. The point isn't to get so weak and to like really take out all the calcium from the bone bank, right? Because then you get really weak and you get osteoporosis, right? That's not the goal, right? The goal is you have a good bank, but the bank's so good, right? You get strong bones, and if someone punches you, or you fall, or you have an accident, you don't break a bone, right? Last thing anybody wants to do is break a bone. I'm sure that's incredibly painful. I've never broken a bone, so knock on wood, right? I want you to be stronger into your young age and into your old age, right? Because I've often seen, and we all see, right? The minute an older person breaks a bone, a pelvis, whatever, it's all downhill from there, right? So let's work to prevent that, right? To take care of your body, get enough calcium, get your K2, right? Get sunlight from God's sun, right? So you could be in better health, have good bones, and support all these other 20 things that it's pretty amazing that a body does. So the goal is to get enough calcium where you don't get weak, brittle bones. I wouldn't recommend taking massive doses of calcium and vitamin D supplements, as that can cause hypercalcemia, with calcium going to the wrong places. Again, that's the point of vitamin K2. And again, don't take too much calcium or take vitamin D supplements, like a lot of it, because I've had people take K2 with vitamin D supplements and they're still getting calcified, right? I mean, vitamin D supplements work that good at intracellular calcium being raised. Other than that, I tell people, please get the complex of vitamin D sunlight for, the stimulation of red light, the green light, the blue light, the visible light spectrum and the invisible light spectrum, and so on, right? That we can't see. Because that all does impact your body. I mean, if you're gone to the sunlight and you feel more energy, that's the green light at work. You ever feel more alert and active? That's the blue light. You feel a bit more better skin, you feel a little calm, but you're happy in a good way. That's going to be the red light. So again, right, it's not vitamin D doing that by itself. It's because it's got the sun rays, right? The UVA, UVB, all that kind of stuff. It's touching your skin, and your skin's, doing what it does with it, and it converts it into something usable, right? So, besides that point, exercising, such as lifting weights, resistance training, are important signals to make sure your bones can get stronger to support stronger muscles. So if you're working out in the gym, right, and you're feeling bone pain, and you're like lifting heavier, you could have good muscles, but you're being limited by your weak bones. So in that case, you might want more calcium intake, so you can get stronger bones, so you can have much more of that tension being relieved, so you can lift even heavier, right? Because it's true. You can have weak bones, good muscles, and you're limited, or you can have good bones and weak muscles, and you're still limited, right? So a pregnant mother needs more calcium and nutrients to support the fetus that grows. A mother that's breastfeeding may need around 850 to 1,200 milligrams of calcium to fuel the nutritious milk cannons for a happy, healthy, nourished baby. So again, it depends, right? Again, if you're a pregnant mother, you need a little more calcium so your baby boy or girl can come out amazing, right? Amongst other things. If you're breastfeeding, which I recommend women to breastfeed their child until they're 3 years old. I say this because the immune system just isn't formed yet, and the kids can get fucking destroyed, sick, annihilated. You see all those sick kids, right? Little toddlers and preschool, and they're getting each other sick and all that kind of stuff. Well, it's because they don't have a good immune system, right? And they need to drink mama's breast milk so they get the right, what was it, like, it's like the right IgGs, the right T cells, B cells, the right signals, the right stuff into the breast milk. Because when a baby sucks on a nipple, I don't know how the magic, the biology, what's going on through here, right? But when that happens, the breast milk then produces the right stuff for the baby if they're sick, so they can fight whatever they're going through, right? And that's something we've lost in our culture because again, women are working, and again, cool, but at the same time, we're kind of neglecting our children and their nutrition. But we're not often taught about that, the immune system part, right? So we want our kids to be big, strong, and healthy as much as they can. Breastfeed them until they're 3 years old, and you know, uh, honestly, the men are like really supportive of that, right? Because we understand the importance of nutrition. Women, I don't know. It's kind of weird. Women, I talked to women about this, and they're like they're bringing each other down. I don't know why they would do that to each other. I find it weird. I thought women would be more sisterhood-like and more supportive of each other, and like give good tips and to support one another. Right? Again, right? It's an honor to have a kid and to get good tips on benefits, right? But yeah, I mean, I don't know why women are shitting on breastfeeding. Some of them, right? And then they're looking down upon women that do that. In my opinion, I think it's jealousy. You have women that have bad diets. They're not eating enough fat. They're eating crap and junk food, and I think they're just sad they couldn't produce milk because they're going to be. I mean, I'm sure subconsciously they feel a way about being a mother, right? But point being, right? I do encourage breastfeeding. It's important. Again, store the milk, right, in the fridge and the freezer if you're doing a surplus. If you're like a really good, milk cow, no offense, men, we love milk cows. It's just reality. I know there's a lot of banks out there. What do you call it? The milk bank, and there are women that do need that extra milk to help support, their children, right? But again, right, it's never going to be the same as the relationship between the child to the mother breastfeeding, because that's where the immune system part happens, so the child can be, safe, happy, healthy. And I got to bring it up. It's important, right? Because my goal is to have the future Americans, right? The young boys and girls grow up to be as strong and healthy as possible, right? Because now we're seeing a bunch of kids with allergies, and I'm like, the ones that were breastfed, they don't really suffer from allergies, like the other kids that were on formula and that crap. And again, formula has like, it's necessary, if you don't have any breast milk, but, if you're not getting, you know, I mean, there's seed oils in breast milk, and there's questionable ingredients in there, and it's fortified with synthetic vitamins, which, I mean, hey, it's better than nothing, right? But, like, you got to question, right, that no matter what you do, right, the formula cannot replicate the majestic beauty of mother's milk. It's really important, and I hope people share this with women, right? Very important. Because again, I don't want weak kids growing up, right? I don't want kids that are full of allergies and they're short and they're not strong and they're self-conscious and it messes with their mental health. And like if we play our cards right, we can have amazing, proud, confident kids. And they go forward and do good things in the world, right? But again, I digressed heavily. So again, based on who you are, find the sweet spot, find what works best with your body, go to your doctor, run some testing on your calcium, and experiment with, different things you might like, right? So, blah, blah, netting, blah, 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 yeah. So, cheese is right. A2 cheese, A2 milk is usually the better one because it's the protein apparently humans developed with. Once we got New World cows and they started, breeding with each other, there was a mutation where a lot of milk became A1 protein dependent and people can have allergic reactions to that. Not like severely, right? But in a way where the body isn't as happy as that. Like, it causes more inflammation, right? Whereas A2 is more natural and people don't really react to that. And then people go from regular milk to A2 and they're so happy because it was a big, significant change. That was a small change, right? Just by doing that. Again, right, I'm always encouraging people to do kefir, right? I think kefir is better than yogurt because yogurt, they put a bunch of crap in it that Yoplait shit, and it's not worth it. I can never find a good yogurt. If I want a good dairy something, it's always going to be kefir that I find. It's got all the strains that you need, the bifido, the lactobacillus, and it helps you with your gut, helps you with your health, and there's so many benefits to probiotics. It's crazy, you know. So some people can take a probiotic and they feel elated, like they turn on and they're happy, and some people they have chronic diarrhea and that boom, that gets resolved, right? So it's kind of interesting how probiotics work, and it's bacteria, right? Ew, bacteria, ooh. But no, I mean, it's not about germ theory, it's about terrain theory, and you want the right bacteria in your body to support you. Let's see, fish with bones like sardines, some people like that, I respect it. Organic figs, some people like figs. I've never been a good fig guy, but some people love figs, and, it's a good source of calcium, right? Bone broth soup, that can sometimes be a good source of calcium depending on how much of the bone's dissolved. And people put, like, bones to simmer with, like, some, like, vinegar, and it breaks down the bone. Tab this on accident. So, yeah, when it comes to milk, always think the natural's better, but you can't get that in the natural milk, right? What you can do is you could find something like Kelowna, right? Or I think even Alexander Farms does this. They do what's called a low vet. So instead of it being a pasteurization or a very high pasteurization, it's a very low pasteurization that kills a lot of the bacteria, but it keeps some good bacteria, and it keeps more of the, what do you call it, the most amazing part of it, lactoferrin, and some other components that when you heat up the milk too much, it destroys it. Which is why I don't really agree with heating up and getting milk all hot, right? You can warm milk up very lightly, but you don't want to do it to the point where you damage the lactoferrin, because lactoferrin can have a lot of health benefits to be conferred. Okay, that's basically it, and oh man, I ran over an hour. I knew I would run over an hour, and I was doing my best to keep this very simple, very easy. Because as I'm reading the research, I'm like, oh my god, you could like make bucks on just like one of these things. Like it's so interesting how calcium works as a signaling molecule, and it does a lot in the body, right? Besides bones and teeth, right? Which is no big deal, right? And it's beautiful that we have this body that God gave us about having this calcium reserve of bones and teeth, so you tap into it when you need it. And more or less, yeah. I mean, that's all I want to say, really. So yeah, if you have any questions, please leave a question. If you want me to make a video on something, please leave me a comment or a message. I'm always looking for new ideas that people are interested in. I'm looking into algorithms and that kind of stuff, but I don't know about algorithms, right? Like, I think they're kind of fake, and that it's portraying people to think they want something, when in fact people actually may not want that, right? What's it called, like predictive modeling, that kind of stuff. I think it's in such a way where it's edging people towards things and not necessarily what people actually want. Again, I take appointments, right? I'm cheap, I'm affordable, I'm good, people love me. So I charge $150 an hour. Everyone says it's very fair. I love you. It's amazing. Some asshole want to charge me $2,000 for an appointment, or someone want to charge $5,000 for a 3-month, program. And people like me because I go based on what you need. I listen to your history, all your health problems, going back to when you were a kid, right? You talk, I listen, the whole thing's an exercise where I listen to you, and you talk and ask interesting questions, and, I get good feedback, and then we have a good dialogue, right? So again, if you want to make a profound change in your health and in your life, and to carry it on forward happily as possible, there's all the things here that I specialize in. I don't want to be a one-trick pony, because the thing about this kind of work, right, is the more you learn about other things in the body, the better you get at everything else, right? So just with the calcium connection, right, I can tell people how to have a little better digestion, right? Better hair, skin, nails, right? I can tell people about, how their hormones might be impacted by low calcium, right? So the way I see it, a good nutritionist, health coach, whatever you want to call it, the more they branch into, the better they are at everything. Because everything connects one way or another, and there's always a really cool connection here that you could apply somewhere else, and it makes everything better, right? So again, yeah, guys, thank you. Please like, share, subscribe. You could clip it, do what you want with this, so people can get healthier. Because that's my goal. That's my mission. I want people to be happier and healthier, right? I want to have the third generation from now being super awesome. I want them all to be 6 foot tall models, like from like Norway or like Sweden, right? But that they're also smart, right? Because they have the brain capacity to do more. I want them to be able to dream big and high and do well in school because they didn't suffer with health problems because mama and daddy, give a shit. And now they came out to be immaculate, you know, precious adults one day, right? It's just the way I'm thinking, right? We're not really there in the future where we could like just Captain America everybody, right? With that serum and they turn into super soldiers. That's cool, but that doesn't exist yet. And if anything, it seems like we're going more of the put a chip in the back of the head kind of thing, and I don't think that's a good thing, right? Because yeah, that's not the way I like it. Just my opinion. But yeah, I'm ending it here because I could talk forever, right? But yeah, everyone, I love y'all. Thank y'all. God bless y'all. Goodbye. And yeah, enjoy your calcium. Get tested and figure out what's the best calcium for you. All right. Goodbye now.